On April 3rd, 2016, the world's largest data leak in history exposed something American elites never wanted you to see. An anonymous whistleblower known only as John Doe released 11.5 million documents from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca, revealing a hidden architecture that had quietly siphoned wealth from democracies for decades. The documents proved what economists had suspected but couldn't measure. American taxpayers held approximately $4 trillion in foreign accounts by 2018, with nearly half hidden in jurisdictions specifically designed to avoid taxation. This wasn't just tax avoidance by a few billionaires. This was systematic capital flight operating at the scale of entire national economies. The leak revealed 214,000 offshore shell companies connected to 360,000 businesses and individuals across 200 countries. Governments around the world eventually recovered more than $1.36 billion in back taxes directly from these revelations, but that recovery represented less than 1% of the annual tax revenue lost to offshore structures, between $129 billion and $205 billion every year in the United States alone. What the Panama Papers exposed wasn't new. The documents detailed structures dating back to the 1970s, revealing a multi-generational transfer of wealth that had been accelerating for 40 years. The leak didn't create the problem. It simply illuminated the machinery that had been running in plain sight. This was the financial architecture of decline, operating openly while remaining invisible to those it impacted most. Capital flight follows a pattern older than any modern nation. When wealth concentrates in the hands of an elite class, and that elite loses confidence in their own system, money doesn't disappear. It relocates. Understanding this pattern requires recognizing three distinct phases that repeat across civilizations. The first phase begins with legal tax optimization. Corporations and wealthy individuals exploit gaps between national tax systems, moving profits through transfer pricing and intellectual property licenses. This stage operates entirely within the law, using legitimate business structures to minimize tax obligations across borders. The second phase introduces secrecy through shell companies and nominee directors. These structures don't change ownership, they obscure it. A corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands with a Panamanian law firm as its agent and a Swiss bank account creates layers that separate the appearance of ownership from its reality. The legal structure becomes a maze designed to exhaust investigators before they reach the beneficial owner. The third phase accelerates when domestic conditions deteriorate. Rising national debt, political instability, or declining returns on domestic investment trigger what economists call sudden stops, rapid capital outflows that can devastate an economy within months. At this stage, capital flight transitions from tax optimization to wealth preservation, and the speed of departure becomes exponential. History shows this final phase can strip a nation of its accumulated wealth faster than any war or natural disaster. The Panama Papers revealed America in the transition between Phase 2 and Phase 3. While corporations like Apple had been using structures like the double Irish-Dutch sandwich since the 1990s, wealthy individuals were increasingly moving not just profits but personal wealth offshore. The data showed approximately 1.5 million American taxpayers holding foreign financial accounts, representing a 1,054% increase from the 130,000 reported in 2001. This acceleration marked a fundamental shift from corporate tax strategy to personal wealth protection. The Roman Empire's 3rd century crisis provides the clearest historical parallel. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome experienced what historians call the military anarchy, a period when the empire nearly collapsed under combined economic and political pressure. The crisis wasn't caused by barbarian invasions alone. It was accelerated by capital flight from Rome's wealthiest citizens. As imperial taxation increased to fund endless military campaigns, Roman elites began relocating their wealth to rural estates and provincial holdings beyond the reach of imperial tax collectors. The denarius, Rome's primary currency, was systematically debased from nearly pure silver to less than 5% silver content by 270 AD. Inflation soared, trade collapsed, and the wealthy retreated to self-sufficient estates. The pattern repeated during the British Empire's decolonization. Between 1945 and 1965, as Britain surrendered its overseas territories, capital didn't stay in newly independent nations. It flowed to London and then dispersed to offshore centers. British colonial administrators, plantation owners, and merchants extracted liquid wealth before independence, using the sterling area monetary system as a highway for capital flight. The empire's formal structure dissolved, but its financial architecture simply relocated and adapted. The modern American pattern began accelerating in the 1980s following financial deregulation. Switzerland's UBS Bank alone helped 17,000 American citizens evade taxes on offshore accounts, eventually paying $780 million in penalties in 2009. Credit Suisse followed with similar schemes, pleading guilty in 2014 and paying over $510 million to resolve allegations of conspiracy to help wealthy Americans evade taxes through secret offshore accounts. These weren't rogue operations. They were systematic programs involving thousands of bankers across decades. The methodology was sophisticated but simple. Wealthy clients would establish shell companies in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands or Panama. These companies would open accounts with Swiss banks, which actively recruited American clients while training bankers to help them hide assets from the IRS. The banks provided encrypted computers, anonymous Swiss credit cards, and advised clients on how to structure transactions to avoid detection. The offshore system revealed by the Panama Papers operates through a precise geographic architecture. Research from the University of Amsterdam identified two categories of offshore financial centers: conduit nations that channel money and sink nations that hold it. 5 conduit countries handle 47% of all corporate offshore investment. The Netherlands channels 23%, the United Kingdom 14%, Switzerland 6%, Singapore 2%, and Ireland 2%. These nations serve as financial highways, moving wealth from high-tax jurisdictions to low-tax destinations. American corporations exploit the system through structures like the double Irish-Dutch sandwich, which Apple perfected during the 2000s. The company established subsidiaries in Ireland that own the intellectual property rights to its products. Sales from around the world would be routed through these Irish subsidiaries, which paid minimal taxes due to agreements with the Irish government, granting effective tax rates as low as 0.005%. This wasn't tax evasion. It was legal tax avoidance engineered at the highest levels. The European Commission eventually ruled this arrangement illegal state aid, ordering Apple to pay $13 billion in back taxes to Ireland for the period 2004 to 2014, covering approximately $111 billion in profits. But Apple wasn't unique. The Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations found in 2013 that U.S. multinationals reported more than half their foreign profits in tax havens, despite doing minimal actual business there. The disconnect between reported profits and economic activity revealed the scale of profit shifting. The pharmaceutical and technology sectors became the most aggressive users of offshore structures. Corporate inversions, when American companies acquire smaller foreign firms and relocate their legal headquarters overseas, accelerated dramatically in the 2010s. Companies like Pfizer attempted high-profile inversions to Ireland and the United Kingdom, seeking to access offshore profit pools without triggering U.S. repatriation taxes. Treasury Department regulations eventually restricted some inversions, but the fundamental incentive structure remained intact. The scale is staggering. By 2017, Fortune 500 companies held an estimated $2.6 trillion offshore, a figure that grew by more than $200 billion in a single year. The 3 most profitable offshore jurisdictions for reported American corporate profits were Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and the British Virgin Islands, jurisdictions where reported profits exceeded 500% of their total GDP. These numbers reveal an obvious fiction. Profits exist on paper in places where no corresponding economic activity occurs. Individual wealth followed corporate money. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, implemented in 2010, forced foreign financial institutions to report accounts held by U.S. taxpayers. The data revealed that about 1 in 5 households in the highest income 1% held assets overseas, increasing to more than 60% for households in the top 0.1%, approximately 13,000 households controlling more than $1.4 trillion. This concentration showed that offshore wealth wasn't distributed across the wealthy. It was dominated by the ultra-wealthy. The geographic concentration is revealing. Nearly half of the $4 trillion in foreign wealth held by American taxpayers sits in jurisdictions classified as tax havens. The system doesn't require relocating physically. Sophisticated legal structures allow wealth to remain under American control while appearing to be foreign-owned. Shell companies registered in Panama, directed by law firms like Mossack Fonseca, owned by trusts in the British Virgin Islands, and managed through Swiss bank accounts, create a maze that separates legal ownership from beneficial control. The economic impact of this capital flight manifests in 3 dimensions. First, direct tax revenue loss to the federal government ranges between $129 billion and $205 billion annually, equivalent to the entire discretionary budget for education, energy, and environmental protection combined. This forces either higher taxes on those who can't relocate wealth, increased federal borrowing, or cuts to government services. The burden shifts systematically from the mobile wealthy to the immobile middle class. Second, the competitive advantage shifts dramatically toward multinational corporations. While purely domestic businesses face the full U.S. corporate tax rate on their profits, multinational corporations pay effective rates as low as single digits by shifting profits offshore. Research from Duke University found that pre-tax foreign income of U.S. multinational companies grew from $100 billion in 1996 to over $550 billion by 2020, with the increase concentrated in tax haven jurisdictions. This creates a two-tier system where size determines tax burden. Third, wealth inequality accelerates through a mechanism most Americans never see. When the top 0.01% can shield wealth offshore while middle-class wages face full taxation, the wealth gap widens not through market mechanisms, but through differential access to financial architecture. The top 1% of Americans are responsible for 28% of the tax gap, the difference between taxes owed and taxes collected, while possessing the resources to make enforcement prohibitively expensive. The IRS estimates that wealthy individuals evade more than $150 billion in taxes annually. The international response has been halting and incomplete. The Global Minimum Tax Agreement, negotiated through the OECD and agreed by over 130 countries in 2021, aims to establish a 15% minimum corporate tax rate worldwide. But implementation faces resistance from the same jurisdictions that profit from the current system. Ireland finally eliminated the double Irish structure in 2020, but American firms simply shifted their intellectual property to the United States, taking advantage of domestic tax incentives that functionally replicate the offshore benefits. The Panama Papers sparked investigations in 79 countries, leading to over 150 inquiries, audits, or investigations. Yet Mossack Fonseca was just one law firm in one country. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists estimates the global cost of tax haven abuse at approximately $492 billion annually, roughly equal to the entire GDP of Belgium or Poland. The recovered $1.36 billion represents less than 3 days of global losses to offshore structures. Historical patterns suggest capital flight accelerates during three conditions: rising domestic debt, political instability, and declining confidence in currency stability. The United States exhibits all three warning signs. Federal debt exceeds $36 trillion in 2025, political polarization has reached historic levels, and confidence in the dollar's long-term stability faces challenges from both cryptocurrencies and competing reserve currencies. These conditions match the pre-collapse indicators from Rome's 3rd century and Britain's post-war period. The technology enabling capital flight has evolved beyond what the Panama Papers revealed. Cryptocurrency and decentralized finance offer new mechanisms for moving wealth across borders without traditional banking infrastructure. Digital assets can be transferred instantly, held in wallets without geographic location, and accessed through nothing more than a private key memorized or stored digitally. This represents capital flight infrastructure that governments cannot easily regulate or monitor. The Panama Papers revealed a truth most economic commentary misses. Capital flight isn't primarily driven by tax rates. Ireland's corporate tax rate of 12.5% is hardly confiscatory, yet it became a preferred destination. The Cayman Islands charges zero corporate tax, yet serves primarily as a pass-through rather than a destination. The real driver is the differential, the gap between jurisdictions that allows wealth to exist in legal limbo, claimed by no government for taxation purposes. America's response to the Panama Papers has been to attack the symptoms while preserving the disease. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act increased reporting requirements, but didn't close the underlying structures. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 reduced corporate tax rates to encourage repatriation, bringing back $665 billion in 2018, but left the offshore infrastructure intact for future use. The system was temporarily disrupted, not dismantled. The contrarian insight is that America has become both victim and perpetrator of the offshore system. The Tax Justice Network's Financial Secrecy Index ranked the United States as the world's largest enabler of financial secrecy in 2022, surpassing Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Bermuda. States like Delaware, Nevada, and South Dakota offer shell company formation with less transparency than many traditional tax havens, creating a domestic offshore system that serves both American and foreign clients. America now competes in the race to the bottom it once claimed to oppose. This reveals the fundamental problem. The Panama Papers exposed a system, but that system serves powerful interests on all sides. Wealthy individuals protect their assets, corporations maximize after-tax profits, and the financial services industry generates enormous fees from structuring and maintaining these arrangements. Even governments benefit. Small jurisdictions build entire economies around offshore finance, while large nations maintain the architecture that allows their corporations to compete globally. Everyone profits except the ordinary taxpayer who cannot access these structures. The $4 trillion that left America through shell companies represents more than tax avoidance. It represents a vote of no confidence by the wealth-holding class in the long-term stability of the American system. When elites move wealth offshore, they're not just seeking tax efficiency, they're building escape routes. History suggests they start building those routes decades before they need them. The Roman elite built self-sufficient rural estates before the cities collapsed. British colonial administrators transferred wealth to London before independence movements succeeded. The wealthy don't wait for collapse. They prepare for it while the system still appears stable. The Panama Papers simply revealed what the preparation looks like in the modern era. The pattern hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The technology has. Shell companies replace rural estates, wire transfers replace physical gold, and tax havens replace distant provinces. But the fundamental dynamic remains identical. When those with the most wealth lose confidence in the system that created that wealth, they quietly prepare for what comes next. The question isn't whether this capital flight will accelerate. The historical pattern suggests it's already underway. The question is, what happens to the nation that's left behind when the wealth departs? The Panama Papers gave us a glimpse of the machinery, but the machine is still running, more sophisticated and more distributed than ever before. And the $4 trillion that's already left America is just the beginning.